The book of Daniel is a beloved treasure. We learn about it in Sunday school if you grow up in church. It's great material to use for sermons. And it's a surprisingly complex book, yet it has such a clear basic message to it. What I want every reader to understand about the book is that anyone can read the book and get the basic message without really a lot of deep details or complex eschatological timelines or without knowledge of the Babylonian world. You can still get the basic message. But if you want to go beyond that basic message, and of course the basic message is the sovereignty of God. It's attested throughout the book. And we need to appreciate that in our times as well. But if you want to go beyond that, it suddenly gets very, very complicated. Daniel is a book that we have beloved narratives, and they're narratives that have anchors in the authentic world of the Neo-Babylonian period, the court of Nebuchadnezzar and the empire of the Babylonians, the plight of the Jewish exiles. For us to figure out exactly what are the kinds of things that are behind these stories. I like to call it a plausible backstory. To get to that is not easy because they're not always what it seems like on the surface. It's easy for us to read a story like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace or Daniel in the lions and think that there's religious persecution going on. But that's not it. These are political issues. And we need to understand that political context in order to understand things like the decree of Darius or the demand of Nebuchadnezzar for the three friends. And so it's not as easy as it might seem. And likewise, the visions have their complexity. And so what we need to know is that we can get what we really need very easily. But if we want to go deeper, it's going to take a lot of work. And you might be surprised with some of the things you find. Let me just give you a quick example. The very familiar story of Daniel and the lions. It's easy to read it and to think that the king has said that nobody can pray to any god except to him. Sometimes, depending on your translation, it looks like that's what it says. But we know that any king of that period, any king of any period, wouldn't tell people they couldn't pray to any god because the kings saw themselves as in partnership with the gods. And you would never tell people not to honor those gods, else you would forfeit that patronage relationship that the king had with the god. Something else is going on there. There's a strategy that the courtiers are using when they get the king to make that decree. And it's a deeply political strategy that has to do with state religion. Now, it's not easy to sort out. And in one sense, we don't need to sort it out to understand the passage. But we don't want to jump to a conclusion about the passage. This is not ruling out prayer. It's ruling out other complicated things that if we know those things, that gives us a little more depth. If we don't, we can still get clear through to the idea that what Daniel did could be viewed, could be construed as being contrary to the king's decree, even though the king was not trying to outlaw what Daniel was doing. There's complex intrigue going on here, very tricky strategy by the courtiers. So the point is that if we're satisfied with saying this decree was made and Daniel knew that he might get in trouble by praying, but he prayed anyway, if we're content with that, we do fine. If we try to understand the political dynamics, it gets a lot more tricky. And to be blunt, we're not really sure. We can only make suggestions. So those are some examples of how we need to think about the work that we do. Remember that we don't need to understand the cultural background of every story to get the message of the narrator. We want to get the message of the narrator. That's what has authority. If we want to understand more deeply, we're going to need cultural background. And that can help us to avoid making mistakes that we could so easily make when we're reading it from our cultural standpoint.